Hello. So I took a 2-week break to initially, obviously, I had the idea to do this format every week, but then I had to rethink a lot of things about the setup that I didn't feel ready to already put it live. I mean, technically, I could have done something similar that I do now, where I'm basically doing brainstorming and thinking out loud in public. But I don't know. I think there was still too much stuff in my head, and also I wanted to run some validations to see if some of my basic thoughts are actually proper thoughts. But today I will basically guide you through what I was thinking about, what I'm starting to change. So at least in my head, I redesigned a lot of things. I mean, obviously, the core thing that I want to achieve with Basesignal is still the same. So I want to build something for gross intelligence. I think, okay, we will get to this, get into more details. So with that, if you're watching it live, feel free to drop any kind of comments. Also, you can just say hi in the comments. If you're not joined live, which I totally understand, because I ridiculously scheduled the whole thing very late again, because too many things. If you watch it later, obviously you can still add some comments if you have some kind of questions, or you can reach out. So today will be a lot about, okay, what was the problem that I saw with the initial Basesignal idea, and then what I'm basically experimenting with. So let's get started on that. So my my initial idea was, okay, Basesignal, obviously, I was talking a lot about gross intelligence. So what is gross intelligence? As a quick refresher, so gross intelligence is the data setup for me, or the data set that you get when you bring together product data, product performance data, marketing performance data, and revenue data. So because when you have this kind of setup, you are then able to, first of all, do specific predictions about upcoming revenue. So you get an idea of the 1,000 new users that you just have onboarded, or potentially not onboarded, but they just create an account, how many of these will end up with some kind of revenue, and where you can maybe do some interventions that you can guarantee that they will end up in some revenue. So this is one thing, but I think the most interesting thing about gross intelligence is more the rich data set that you can create. Okay, what kind of criteria? And this criteria can be very broad. So I always call this the microsegments, where you say, okay, I create a microsegment of people have watched one of my live videos. They picked this specific plan. They have used these two features most of the time, and they have been now retained for almost 4 months. So does this microsegment outperform other microsegments? Because this then gives me the possibility to really plan, first of all, marketing activities. It also plans okay, what kind of features can really play a role, and so on. So this is still the thing where I want to get to. So one of the things that I recognized when I was thinking about this last year, okay, how to build this, is, well, that's not so easy to build. I mean, it has a lot of building blocks. So first of all, the data model is quite of a challenge, but I think this is doable. So I did these setups now multiple times, so I think I know it well enough to standardize it to some degree. The other part, which was much more difficult, and this was why I said, okay, gross intelligence is something that will happen much, much later, is you need basically 3 blocks before that. So you need to have a system that can analyze product performance And you need to have a system before that, and I don't even know how to call it. Let's maybe call it, because I don't know, we have a good name for it, great product context or understanding. And what does it mean? So I can explain. Product performance is straightforward. This is basically the biggest problems of product analytics is that in most setups, how it's set up, it doesn't really provide you any kind of insights how well your product is performing, because you do very granular measurement, usually of interactions. So where do people click? Do they use this list view? Do they change the filter setting? So it doesn't tell you anything about, okay, did they actually get value from it? So in most of these setups, the value is basically pushed to some retention curves. Retention curves are great, but they also have a very limited possibility to to make them operational. They're interesting for deep dive analysis, but they're not really interesting to run operations on top of product. So, I mean, there are enough people, including myself, who have posted about it, how you can measure product performance. This is usually at least the basic implementation is you introduce user states and you monitor how people are moving between user states. User states means the ones that I usually get started with, we have new users, so everyone who has created an account. Then we have activated users. These are the ones that within the first 48 hours have done X, Y, that. So at least this is our first signal where we can say, okay, these users seem to start to understand what we can offer to them. Then we have active users. So these are the ones who are doing something valuable for them continuously. So we define the time frame. So we can say every week, every day, every month. So depends on your product, how you say this. And ideally, you want to keep people into the active state as much as possible. Obviously, there might be drops, but let's say when you look on a year, you would say, okay, 80% this user was active on a monthly basis. If they start to become not active anymore, we can then track other states, for example, at risk. So maybe we have some accounts that have been active 3 months ago, very active, and now they are not active anymore. And so we flag them as at risk because we see a drop in their engagement or them showing up. And therefore, it might be a good idea to reach out and say, hey, what's actually the matter? And also, it gives us a proxy to predict, okay, there is, let's say 50% of them will churn. We know this from the data. So we already know, okay, when we flag these many at risk, we know right now with our current setup, we will lose 50% of them in the next 3 months. So we already know how revenue is developing. And so then we have dormant user, which are the ones who have been active quite a while ago, but let's say this is product churn. So the product already have churn. They might be still under subscription, but we already know this will end eventually because they're not using the product anymore. And then we can do different kind of activities to move them again into active and so on. So this creates a nice operations model for a product. So this is product performance. So my idea was okay, before we do growth intelligence, we have to do product performance. So this is basically my second phase that we have to build. So then I came to the problem was, well, to do product performance, we have to define a lot of things. So the tricky thing is with product performance, what I just described, activated, active, these are not so straightforward to design and they need careful handling. So the metrics look great when they are in place, but the metrics are not super simple to define. So this is usually the part where people hire me, that I run workshops with them to figure out, okay, how do we actually define activated? What is our first hypothesis? How do we test this hypothesis? Do we now have a solid understanding of activated or not? So if I would say to people, well, look, the system can do this. You just have to write down which kind of events does someone has to do to flag this account as activated. I was afraid, and maybe this is wrong, but I was afraid that too many wouldn't have any kind of idea. So I wanted to have a system that supports you really well with that. This is what I mean with great product context and understanding. So my hypothesis was, okay, when I build something before all these that generate good product context, then it's pretty straightforward. Then I can use the magic AI models to propose how you would actually measure product performance. So because this was my first idea. So my first idea was I create basically AI-driven interviews because I just take what I usually do. So in the end, I just took my approach and say, okay, when I just throw AI very stupidly on it, how would it look like? I mean, when I work with a team in this kind of projects, I do a decent amount of interviews. Sometimes, I mean, in a lot of setups, I can boil it down to a 2-hour very intensive workshop. But still, like I have a very set of questions that I usually ask, and then afterwards I have a quite good idea how we define everything else, and then we can refine it. So this was my initial idea. This was the thing that I showed in the other kind of videos. So when you rewatch them, you will see. And to be fair, this worked quite well. So like I had 2 types of interviews already ready. So one like for more generic overview of the customer journey, and then the second one for going deeper into activation. And it worked really well. So it could identify, I would say, quite well the major touch points that people have in a customer journey. And also like for activation, it had a good idea what it could flag as the activation event. So here comes the problem, or at least the problem that I discovered. When I was starting to reach out to people to say, hey, maybe do you want to test and so on, and like, hey, it would be really great, because like obviously I can do these interviews very straightforward because I'm doing them usually from the other side. So for me, it's super, I can answer them very, very easily because like I have these answers. I mean, I ask the questions, so that definitely has an influence how I can answer them. So I was starting to reach out to people, and I got not very enthusiastic feedback. I think like turns out, again, hypothesis, because I haven't tested it with 100 people, is that for most of the people, even the interviews is a tough process. So because it really needs experience and training to understand product context in such a way that you can boil it down into a very solid definition of activation and so on. So that was the point 2 weeks ago where I thought, something is not right here. There's also like, I think maybe like the second thing that pushed me over was more like, okay, I'm missing the spark here. So there was an initial spark when I did one of these interviews, and then it basically really mapped out the whole journey. I was like, okay, that's quite cool. And also they generated a tracking plan based on that, and generated the first measurement plan based on that. But then painting the whole picture didn't really felt very, very appealing, because I think the problem was that I said, look, the first version of this product is this. And when I was explaining to people what is actually the benefit of the whole thing, I was trying to explain this because like this would be the first one that could be available, but I always had a hard time to describe why you should actually do that. I mean, obviously, I could always say, yeah, you get a better tracking plan. So, but is this just a tracking plan tool? Not really. Then I was like, oh, I can create a really great product profile, so that in the end, like a cheat sheet or like an architectural drawing where you like all these, where you sometimes have this technical explosion illustration where in the end it shows like what makes your product. So I can create something like this, can look really great and so on. But no, also like it never really went in this way where I would say it makes sense. So, and I haven't solved it yet. I think in the end, like the tricky thing is actually everyone wants to get here. So when I'm doing my trainings, if I want to get people sign up, I have to talk about this. If I just want to have very few people signing up, I have to talk about this. If I want to have almost no one signing up, I have to talk about this. So I did different kind of trainings around these 3 different kind of topics. And when I talk about this, people are queuing up. I talk about this, not so much. And when I talk about this, who cares? And that's an interesting thing. But on the other hand, I mean, I think it's a good and interesting signal to see, because I'm obviously, like, if I can pick, I would also pick this. I mean, if I wanted to move up from something like Amplitude or Post-hoc, yes, that's a slight update, but obviously I want to get there. So because like everything else, well, yeah. So I mean, if I use this one, I think I can manage a product definitely better, because like I know, okay, we are losing too many people in the first let's say the first 48 hours. So this is really like a problem. But in the end, like I actually want to get there. So I'm back to the drawing board. I'm back to, okay, how do we actually do it differently? So, and I have different kind of hypotheses, and I can show you the different kind of hypothesis. And if you have any kind of feedback on that, so I'm happy to hear it, because like, again, it's, this is why it's called riffing on Basesignal. So we like, it's still experimentation phase. So one of the things is, okay, I still believe that product context is an essential ingredient. It's a super essential ingredient for a lot of things that are happening here. So one of the things is like when I was experimenting more with AI, let's say AI models and AI optimized data sets for gross intelligence, I got the best results when I expanded the, let's say, very data-focused data set to a more context-driven data set. So what does it mean? It means like I took account information and took, let's say, very generic account data, like, okay, when did they sign up, from which kind of source were they coming, which kind of webinar they're watching, or what kind of video or whatever. And I was enriching it. What does it actually mean? So like when someone like is interacting with content, can I derive something from that? What is their motivation? So I was basically layering on top of the data with the kind of company, let's say, product context that I had in my head. And with that, the data set becomes so powerful. So therefore, product context is something that is really important, and it's super hard to get. I mean, you could say you could just talk to a product team. Usually not, because like also like product team is extremely well in gathering a lot of information about the product. Different areas, like they can do some general research about it, they can do some user interviews, they will analyze some data, they will test some features, how they perform. So they gather a lot of information, but it's super hard to put it in the right context to then use it in a data set. So what I'm currently working on is, so I'm taking this, I'm taking the product context and understanding, and I move the interviews a little bit more to the side. So I'm not getting rid of them, because I still think they have a value, but I think they don't work in a current shape. So what I'm doing right now is I'm working on a, let's say, automatic context generator. So what it does, and I just got started this week, is so you provide your website. If you don't have a website, you provide your product vision or where you want to go as an input. And then I have multiple models or agents, however we want to call them, who will then try to gather as much context as possible. So, and let's say we do the website example, it's very straightforward. So it will go to your website, it will crawl your website, it will look for very specific type of content that you have on your website. So obviously we're looking how you present your stuff on the homepage. This gives us some idea about strategy. Then we will look into pricing, gives us good idea about pricing models that are later important. Then we look into documentation, into help pages and so on, to get a good idea, okay, what kind of features are actually driving. Then we have a model that's working on top of that, that is then trying to distill out this different kind of information. So for example, what are the typical jobs to be done that we see within the product? Then out of these jobs to be done, what are the candidates that play a very important role when you onboard your users? So when people are starting to create a new account, what would be the first success moment? So can we find candidates for them? So in the end, like, it does a brainstorming on product context, and then it presents it back to you. And then, for example, you can either do it manually, or you can use AI-driven interviews to refine it, to say, no, actually, this is the wrong assumption. We know this better because, and so on. So the idea is to build a rich product context layer that will then support automatic analysis on these. Because another thing that I was thinking about is, like, classic analytics products will change. So obviously there will be a new category of these products coming out. How will this category look like? No one has any idea, including myself. Because I think this is the experimentation phase we are currently in. What kind of interface do we need? So one thing that I'm thinking right now is, I guess I will need a classic interface still, but what kind of role does this classic interface still have? Is it just something that visualizes the outcome of it? So, hey, I just want to see my product characteristics. So I have, let's say, this is where I can log in and I can see all the different kind of details that we have found. I think this is still valuable. But the interesting thing is, like, when it comes down to product performance and growth intelligence, obviously, we don't want to go into a system to analyze which microsegment is the next best thing we should analyze or we should invest some time into. So this is actually something that I want to have something surface automatically to me and tell me. I might still want to have, let's say, a generic operational dashboard that will tell me, okay, look, when I have one glance, okay, how specific things are moving, because, like, it's still something that is nice to see, and it helps to create your own context, your own understanding of your product performance. But this might be the only thing. So this might be you just check in there, or maybe you just get, I don't know, your automatic agent is just sending you the quick summary every Monday morning, and you just have a quick look on it and say, okay, fine. But the deep dive, you don't, either you have some analyst who's doing this, but this is not a product for analysts. So if there should be a deep dive happening, it will happen not by you. It will happen by any kind of automatic processes in the back. And my hypothesis, or my bet is, at least based on the experience that I have so far, if you really want to run a, let's say, an agentic analyst, the major work is designing the context for it. It's also not like, oh, we have to just have a good data set, just a good semantic layer and so on. I did these experiments and they were not really overwhelming. I mean, obviously, like, if you have a metric layer or semantic layer, it improves things, but not really. At least not in my experience. Or at least it does things where I would say, yeah, fine. This is something I would expect from a junior analyst. But from a senior analyst, I would expect really deep insights that one of us, like a typical senior analyst, would take a data set or different data sets and would spend 1 or 2 days or 3 days, maybe the first day by interviewing people to understand the context better, and then so does the same thing. Like, the analyst will create their own context window, and like, the real good analysts are really good at this, creating the context window for their analysis, and then they do their analysis work. And then they come up with something that no one has identified in the data before. And sometimes this can be something where you say, okay, that's interesting, but it's not really moving anything. But sometimes you come across things where you think, that's super interesting. And it could be a baseline for a new initiative that we are running. This is what good analysts do. So, but the good analyst this is the essential thing that makes a good analyst, to create their own context window in such a way that analyzing everything here then becomes just a mundane task. So this is skill here that they have, or experience that they just have trained on, but the real creativity and the real, how to say, outstandishness of specific analysts is like what they're doing here. And I came across this all the time. And it's also like something when I'm working in specific projects where like when people bring me in and they say, okay, can you also help us with analysis, where in the past I always said, yeah, sure, I can try. I was rarely successful because I had no idea what this company is about. So I was missing a lot of parts of the context window of this company because I was not there for 1.5 years. I'm not sitting in every kind of meeting. I mean, again, this makes the thing with automatic context generator potentially difficult because right now I have the hypothesis that every product has enough public available information that can create already a really good context for understanding product performance and growth intelligence. That might be wrong. So this is something that I have to test now. This is something which I will test. So I'm now at the stage, so coming back to what I'm actually building is like, what I have now is I have a MCP server. Yes, we're talking about MCP servers again. Maybe this is something for a different session to tell, okay, why I think we called off maybe MCPs too quickly. I think for a good reason. So most of the first MCPs that I worked with were not really helpful. But I think it's also like a design problem. So you can design MCPs in a way that they are useful. So right now I have an MCP server where like you can hook it up with whatever agent you're using, and you just tell the MCP server, look, this is my website. Here are 2 or 3 other document inputs that I want to put in. Now go ahead and build my product context data set or data layer or whatever we want to call it. And then the whole process runs off and collects all the different kind of pages, then starts to qualify it layer, and at some point it comes back and would say, that worked pretty well. It might right now it takes some time, so around 5 minutes. So it comes back and then says, look, this is the picture that I have. Some parts are already pretty solid. So for example, because pricing pages, I get very quickly a good solid data set on the revenue structure and the, let's say, what are the different models that you're using, also like that could be interesting from a data perspective. The thing that I'm currently working on is obviously like the design part for product performance. So an ideal case, I build a really good engine that can distill jobs to be done from your website that can then be used to define activation and active, because sometimes you use different definitions there. And so this is what I'm working on now. So right now, this is what the development part that is currently running there, and already since yesterday. So it's running for a long time because so I'm currently working on the model that can distill activation levels out of the website data. And activation levels means like I want to determine, okay, let's say 4 or 5 activation levels when people sign up. So level 1 means like something very obvious that they should do. Then level 2 would be something more complicated, level 3 and so on. So that in the end, like this gives you an interesting data set that helps you to define how you define activation, because you will see, okay, are people on level 4 actually more likely to end up in revenue than people on level 1? So it gives you different kind of stages, and then you can pick one later as your, how to say, activation candidate. So I'm working on this already, and I will be super curious to see how this works. So if it works, I can show something next week when I do my next session. But again, like I think maybe, and again, I might go into a rabbit hole here right now that is completely ridiculous. I mean, the good and bad thing is this whole thing is an experiment for me. This whole thing is basically a lab. So I haven't raised money that I have to deliver a product. I won't raise money to deliver a product. This is more like me experimenting in the public with how could you actually build what I vaguely have in mind. So what can you build that you get there and it's really, really good? And obviously, like I have some hypothesis that might be completely wrong. Maybe this here in the front is much lower value than it actually is. Maybe someone comes around, creates an agentic model that runs on product performance that does well enough with just some generic assumptions and can deliver already really good product experience. And like they're just skipping the whole part that I'm doing right now, and like they're just still have. I might be the premium product that in the end like gets the 5% more, but for a lot of people, then 5% more is not a reason to use or wait for what I'm doing. So again, right now in this, I don't know, right now in the product world, I think you have a lot of hypotheses where you have no idea if they're true or not. Same with this one. Is MCP server a good interface or not? I mean, this one is more flexible because like in the end, like I could switch it to a CLI as well. So it doesn't really matter. I can still have a front end, which I think I will still have to at least visualize some parts. I don't know. It's still fun to experiment, especially like since I moved here, because now I can take data sets, which are product websites, and I can take the public data sets and I can just see how would I build the stuff for it? And also like I can compare it how I would do it from the outside. Obviously, it's missing all the internal one. And this could also be something else. It's like that the public available context is actually not good enough to build the whole thing, so that you need a lot more internally. So I was just listening to a podcast today where someone said like, maybe it's a great idea to just take all the emails and all the Slack channels and just throw them in a big model and then just determine what the whole company is about. Might be true. Might be that there's the exact context that we all need, or maybe not. I think the interesting thing right now is like no one has any kind of idea. So yeah, so where I think after the last session, I was quite confident that, hey, I will roll this out very quickly in February. And like then I build this and then I build this. And so I have a very clear path forward. I wouldn't say I went back to zero. Definitely not, because I learned already some things, but I definitely took 2 or 3 significant step backs. So there won't be anything released right now. I still have to do a lot of testing. I mean, when this creates quite interesting results, I might make this available, that you can just work on building your product context layer. And then maybe this is already, so one thing that I can obviously experiment is like I built the product context layer as an MCP server, and then I hook it up with the other MCP servers for something like amplitude and so on, and can just see, okay, when I just bring it both together, can the agent already create really great stuff? Maybe this is already enough. Then the product is just, hey, I have the best engine for creating product context that you can use for data analysis, but you can also use for any kind of other product work. Who knows? So I don't definitely know. So with that, I don't know. I guess it was a bit of a confusing session because I have so many question marks. But on the other hand, I mean, it's part of the process. So, and when I watch specific videos, I like when people do this. So therefore, like maybe there's 1 or 2 person out there who like this as well. All right. With that said, I have to switch back. Good. So with that said, I wish everyone a really nice weekend. If you watch this later, like I wish you whatever you are just watching it right now, all the best. And let's hope I do another session next Friday. And then I will be 1 day off, not 1 day, 1 week off for holidays. So like when I think I will definitely do one on Friday, because like the week after there will be no live stream about this. So see you in the next one.